I don't like Ernie Armenta's views on a lot of things. But given the choice of Ernie Armenta or more of the same, and that's what all your incumbents represent, more of the same, show me an incumbent that stood up and said, I am against this war. I will do everything in my power. I will get our city, our county to pass a resolution against this undeclared, unconstitutional war. The reason we have a constitution is to keep us out of wars that destroy our civil liberties. Those of us that really do our research know that 9/11 was an inside job. Not by everybody, not everybody in the government. Just a few key people like Bush, Cheney, Rumsfeld, Condoleezza Rice, these kind of people. They knew what was coming down. Do you think it was just an accident that President Bush happened to leave the Capitol and go to the state in Florida where his brother's governor on the day of September 11th, 2001? Are there no schools in D.C.? He could have watched, could have ridden half a block from the Capitol and gone to an inner city school in D.C. and listened to stories being read to children. Why all the way to Florida? How come Building 7 World Trade Center, that 47-story high black building, came straight down 6 hours after the towers and no plane hit it? Hello? If you're not even aware of 7 World Trade Center, then you are not paying attention. And you're going to get the lousy fleecing. And it's not surprising Elton Gallegly would not show up today, tonight, next week, because many of you will simply blindly vote for that rotten Elton Gallegly. And I think I can say he's rotten because he promised me after the election 8 years ago, or 6 years ago, 4 years ago, he would show up to discuss issues. I called his Mr. Pfeiffer at his office today. He said he'd relay the message. That sounds like a congressman that does not want to face any tough questions. He just wants to be reelected without any serious challenge, and he's never had a serious challenge. They've cut him a safe Republican district, just like they cut that snake-type district for Lois Capps. That's why virtually all the congressmen get reelected. We need to vote them all out. At least in this state, I can't think of a single Congress critter in this state, incumbent, that deserves to be reelected. Not a single one. So we can't really find out why Elton Gallegly voted one way or another. We can't really find out. He's not going to answer you, me, or anybody. He doesn't have to. He's as arrogant as a king sitting on a throne. And if we tried to vote him out, they would just flip the vote with their die-bolt voting machines. So with that, I want to take you now, just divert a little bit. I want to take you back. Why did we have 9/11? It was to get rid of our civil liberties and get us into a war. A war that Bush wants to be endless war against terrorists. When you ask most people in the world outside the U.S., who is the chief terrorist in the world? There is no question. It's George W. Bush. Killed over 1 million Iraqis who have not harmed one of us in this country. Not one of us. They had nothing to do with 9/11 at all. If they did, go look at the FBI website. Why are none of those 20 people alleged to have hijacked planes with little box cutter knives? Ridiculous. Why are none of them listed on the FBI's most wanted list? In fact, we know 5 of those people that Bush, Cheney, and the media spin-meisters at Fox, we know at least 5 of those people are alive and working. One's a computer analyst. One flies in airlines for Morocco Airlines. They're not dead, people, because it never happened the way the media lied to you. But before that, we had the Waco event. That was staged. Did you know that guy, David Koresh, was actually jogging right by the command post before that whole thing started at Waco? They could have just reached out and said, hey, David, we want to chat with you, and taken him into custody. They didn't do it. Why didn't they do it? because they wanted to have an event to cause Congress to take away your civil liberties, allow arrest without trial, and we've seen that with William Christopher. He sat in prison, and he had nothing to do with there. It was simple domestic violence. Sat in prison for almost 7 years with no trial. And then they tried to say he's crazy because he caught them, and we verified the courts had doctored his records. So going back to Waco, then the Alfred P. Murrah bombing back in April, more than a decade ago. All that is a series of disasters having nothing to do with any terrorists anywhere in the world except the terrorists in the White House. And I know as a Republican, it doesn't make me feel very good to say that about another Republican, but when can we speak the truth if not now? When over 5,000 Americans have died in undeclared wars, which means they're Bush's wars, not America's wars, then all those who died should have a class action lawsuit against Bush and Cheney, Rumsfeld and Rice to personally make them pay several $1,000,000 for each dead soldier. Because it wasn't declared by Congress. Therefore, under our Constitution, under the document we call the Constitution, it's an illegal war. Hello? It's an illegal war. It's not our country's war. They're using our soldiers. They're abusing our soldiers. I support our soldiers. I am myself a Vietnam veteran who suffered injuries in Vietnam, who saw my cousin Captain Wagner, my other cousin who lived in my town in Wisconsin, Lieutenant Philip Overbeck, who I knew much better. They died. And 3 more cousins died for a war that now makes no sense. As we look back, it made no difference at all. America is no freer. In fact, we're less free because we fought in Vietnam. We are less free. Now the communists of Vietnam are begging us to come back and rebuild our Navy base in Cam Ranh Bay and other places. They want us to come back and rebuild and service our Navy ships in communist Vietnam because they want the bucks. 56,000 of my fellow soldiers died in a useless war. And there are many of you out there are mad when you hear me say that. You ought to be mad at McNamara. You ought to be mad at LBJ. You ought to be mad at those that kept a useless war going that served no purpose other than to make the war corporations richer. And now, thanks to a libertarian idea adopted by Democrats and Republicans, that was to privatize as much of the military as you can, we've got these privatized war machine corporations like GACI, Blackwater Murderers, GACI Murderers, Bechtel. They've got these huge contracts. They lose $2 billion worth of stuff, and they don't account for it, and we just give them more contracts. This is insanity. Meanwhile, you're losing your home. Your sons and daughters can't get decent jobs. It's time to put an end to it. Election is but a month away. And if you get nothing out of this show, go vote against all incumbents. Even if the incumbent you think, well, he's not that bad a guy. He's just our city councilman. I kind of like him. He went in the dunk tank, at Waller Park Day. And gee whiz, he's kind of a funny, nice guy, and he works for a charity. I would hardly call that work for the charity, but whatever. I like Bob too. I like Leo. But if you don't vote them out, the message won't get to the Congress critters that you can't reach because they're going to be reelected no matter what you do. They have carved out safe districts. So with that, I want to get back to this brave black police officer, Sergeant Terrence Yeakey. He was rescuing people right at the Alfred P. Murrah building because he was videotaping some very odd things going on right before the bomb blast at about 9:15 that morning in April, more than a decade ago. For that tape, he was, right before he's supposed to get an award for his heroism and his bravery and his service, he was cut, according to the autopsy, 13 times, 3 times here, 3 times on each wrist, and 1 deep cut on the garrote here, and deep cut here. And then he was shot from this angle, and if you get a police revolver, to get it up here, this angle, and shoot down, why would you go to this much trouble to commit suicide? Because that's what they're claiming Sergeant Yankee did. He's saying that, the trauma of the Alfred P. Murrah bombing was so great, Sergeant Yankee committed suicide. Well, I don't think so. And I tracked down his mother and asked her some questions. And I'm going to give you just a little bit of that interview. But we're going to do a whole show on Terry Yankee. And when I'm done with that show, with the witnesses we have, there will be no doubt in your mind Sergeant Yankee never committed suicide. If you're going to commit suicide, why would you cut yourself 13 times and then reach like this to shoot yourself from a top angle down through the temple and out the jaw? And that's not even a fatal injury. Most policemen know how to kill themselves because they've seen dead bodies. They've been through training. You put the gun in your head, in your mouth, and you blow out the back of your cerebellum, and you're done. It's over. You don't have to torture yourself with cuts. No, he was tortured. He was tortured to hide the truth so that no one would ever see that tape, and they think the tape is gone forever. But maybe not. I give you Sergeant Yankee's mother, and I'll be back in a few minutes. This is unedited tape interview I did less than a week ago. A brave cop who was tortured and murdered, and I thought you ought to hear from his mother. We didn't get that tape ready. That happens sometimes on live shows. We're going to get the tape ready. This 6 foot, 5 inch, 200 pound with no fat, brave Oklahoma police officer had just applied, and I saw the application. He'd sent in his drug test for the FBI. No reason did he have to commit suicide. He didn't like the El Reno Police Department. He moved on to Oklahoma City. He found dirty cops. He found cops doing drugs, pushing drugs. Yeah. He didn't want to actually fight them because they were so intransigent in the police department. He decided and applied for the FBI. And it looks like he had a bright future ahead of him. And he had just worked tirelessly for hours that morning to save a lot of people who were bleeding. So I want you to think about this guy as you listen to his mother. But right now we'll go back. I want you to watch The War Dead. And we'll go back and watch The War Dead for about 2 minutes. I want you to look at these soldiers and ask yourself, as you watch these snapshots of the dead soldiers, ask yourself, are we any better now than we were 3 years ago when these guys died? Have we really won anything? Is our Mexican border safe from 100,000 illegals, some of which are criminals coming across the border? But we've got endless billions to make Bechtel, Blackwater, Gacke Corporation, and others filthy rich over in Iraq, while their CEOs sit in the Beltway of Washington, D.C., sucking up your money while you lose your job, you lose everything. Watch this, we'll be back in a few minutes.
stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight. O'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets' red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, sing does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave.
We've experienced, first of all, in our own households. Somehow, we have to be able to make these taboos in our own personal life a commonplace within the culture. Because in that way, Bush couldn't lie to us. He couldn't manipulate us. He couldn't play on our fears and our insecurities and manipulate us against each other. He couldn't divide the country and say that there's two Americas, there's the rich and the poor, when we all are suffering from the same thing. In Watts is homicide, and Beverly Hills is suicide. So somehow we have to find a way to be able to expose our wounds, the things that we cover in our heart, the things that we are so secretive about. We have to find someone we love, someone we know, someone we don't know, and we have to expose those things.
It tells you that this is unpatriotic. Oh, please. You know what is unpatriotic? What is unpatriotic is holding back from speaking your truth. That is what is unpatriotic. Flypaper theory, right? That we are fighting them over there, so we're going to have to fight them over here. Well, the truth is that they are dying over here because we're fighting them over there. And so, I want to bring on Cindy by telling you one of my favorite quotes from the classical Greeks, you know, my tradition. And they were discussing orators in Greece once, and they said, when you hear Pericles, you hear people say, what a wonderful speaker. But when you hear Demosthenes, you hear people say, let us march. I bring you Cindy Shiva.
Wow, this is pretty incredible. I didn't go to Crawford to be a leader. I went to Crawford to, it's very simple. I'm a very simple person. You know, my son was killed and I wanted to know why. I saw 14 Marines were killed in one day, and that's the day I decided to go to Crawford. I saw the president get up. Oh, usually I go, president, get up and he was speaking to a group of business people in Texas somewhere. He didn't mention the 14 Marines or their families, but he said that everybody who has died in Iraq has died for a noble cause. And then he said, the thing that has infuriated me ever since my son died, my son was killed by his policies. He said, we have to complete the mission to honor the sacrifices of the ones who have fallen. And I have challenged him for months about that. And this is before he knew my name, but I would send him emails all the time. And I would say, stop using my son's name to justify your killing policies. You know, I was on Anderson Cooper a couple times. The first time I was on, I said, you know what, I'm here in Crawford because you don't do your job.
Well, that was Cindy Sheehan again. And the reason I like Cindy Sheehan is not because of any of her liberal policies, but simply on one issue. Her son, Casey Sheehan, was murdered by the Bush bad foreign policy. It's bad because it violates the Constitution. If Bush had been required by our gutless Congress, with gutless Congressmen like Elton Galigli and Lois Capps, if those two gutless wonders had been willing to force Bush to get a declaration of war from Congress. With the declaration, you state when the war is won and how you end it. And by the way, Ron Paul, way back, offered a declaration of war, and everybody voted against it, including Ron Paul. His point was he wanted to have the war constitutional. And by the way, there's another part of the Constitution. It talks about setting bounties on specific individuals. It's called letters of marque and reprisal. Read your Constitution. It's in there, people. We didn't have to send all these guys to get depleted uranium poisoning, both our GIs, which to me is treason all by itself, and the others. I'm sorry I can't bring you that Sergeant Yeekey tape. It's not prepared properly, but we'll have it for you next week or the week thereafter. It's a real interesting interview with his mother. And when you hear that, you'll understand why. I want to tell you a little bit about Wilbur. Wilbur looks like a Santa Claus, big white beard. His little girl was taken from him on false lies by Child Protective Services in Oregon. And when it was all done, the Oregon authorities used his little girl for a kind of demonstration of what a porno film, and they had her dancing around, running around with little or no clothes. And a former prosecutor named Roger Wegener. We're going to show you that tape now. And on the left, you will see Roger Wegener's mother in her 90s. And this is from a show up in Oregon. She went to bat for her son, the prosecutor, when he turned against the corrupt courts of Oregon. And the reason Wilbur's there is to sound off. And he, by the way, won. Him and a gal named Pam won a big multi-million-dollar lawsuit against the state of Oregon. And they have, to this day, never paid off. That's what I call failure of accountability by election officials. We'll go to that, and I'll be back with the Federalist Papers by Mary Webster.
Had been stripped out of the system. I had no idea that it had been so stripped out of the system when I got into this, Brother Will, almost 20 years ago when I met Jeanette Kent.
Me too.
I thought we had, in my case, that we caught a crooked attorney that had wiped out his partner, and that when we had all of his employees that came forward and said,
Thought it was a small cabal.
I said, well, once we get into court, because this is how naive I was, I thought, well, it's going to be difficult to get into court because of Jeanette Kent. She was very distraught at the time,
Yeah.
and to get the story out. But we went into Judge Crookham's courtroom, and Jeanette got on the stand and laid it all out. I was so impressed. Milton Brown, the little thieving attorney, he couldn't speak. He was beat red. On the stand. Now this was 19 years ago, in 1988, and I thought, we have won.
And what was the judge's ruling on that?
He turned it over to, he signed an order telling them to turn the assets, to turn the property over forthwith. Now I was on inactive status, and we had a friend who was not a friend, an attorney that I knew that was an accomplished attorney that won the case. But then the attorney that we hired, Gary McMurray, became hostile with me.
Yeah.
So I
And
had,
your mother was in all these court hearings.
but not that, she wasn't in the action, and this was building up to the case right after we won the case. Then the bar started, everyone started getting hostile with me.
Retaliate.
And so I started going into the courtrooms with large crowds of people. I'm a former attorney, public prosecutor. 30 years ago, I was the government. When I say that, if some police officer arrested someone, or some child service division, or some bureaucrat wanted to have legal action taken, they would come to me in the Consumer Fraud Department, and I would listen to what they had to say and then file the papers. So that I had that kind of background. Now we had won the case. The assets were awarded to Jeanette Kent.
How much did Jeanette get, Roger?
To date, she has got a fat zero, and probably have spent a couple of $1 million in going into court. When I realized what was happening, that the judge, Lee Johnson, turned and was just ignoring what was said, I said, well, we'll get a crowd of people.
Yep.
So I brought in 70 people. I brought in retired fire chiefs. My father is a retired deputy chief in the Portland Fire Department. My mother and this group in the courtroom. I said, now we're going to force that crooked Judge Lee Johnson.
With all those stable, honest citizens.
Yes, sitting there. And when I walked into the courtroom, I'd circulated a notice in the community telling the people that what was going on and that they were trying to cover up this stuff. Please attend. And when he got on the bench, he said, Mr. Widener, he said, I'm sitting there with this courtroom, and he says, you in the courtroom, I want all of you to know that I've had a chance to observe Mr. Widener during these proceedings, and I find his conduct outrageous and unprofessional.
Outrageous.
And I said, I'm in the courtroom. He said, I see you. I said, well, if you're going to attack me, Judge Johnson, I want to be called to the stand so I can testify truthfully. He said, one more word out of you, Widener, and I'll have you taken out of here. And he had done that previously in his courtroom when Attorney Lindstedt was lying, and I stated it, and he ordered the guards to remove me, so I said it again. I said, I said, you've done that in the past, Judge Johnson, when I tried to speak the truth in this courtroom. And he said, guards, and Henry Serbaugh said that he saw one of the guards pull a gun when he came in. And I said, when he said that, I said, now, Lindstedt, tell, the attorney was standing, I said, tell these people to their face what you'd be saying behind my back. And when they took me out, they said Judge Johnson threatened Jeanette Kent that she could impose sanctions if he found her claim frivolous. Now this was, we were trying to recover this from the attorney that we'd hired, Norman Lindstedt, who we had put in as the personal representative because I was not on active status, who had turned on us, and we're trying to drive the attorney away from the case because he is fighting us. I stood and physically threatened him, Will, in the court. I'm warning you, Lindstedt, get out of this case. And he's down hiding behind his attorney. The Oregon State Bar hired an attorney. Here, the Oregon State Bar, which is set up to protect the citizenry, that was the purpose of it, is now hiring attorneys to protect the thieving attorneys and at the same time attacking me. This was 19 years ago that when they started this.
So your mother, Mrs. Frances Widener, she was involved in this case, was she?
Well, where she really came in her own, always there early on supporting, coming in with my father and people in the neighborhood. But I got involved trying to help some pastors recover property out in Clackamas County. I'd been arrested by when I was arrested in Judge Johnson's courtroom. I was tried and convicted in Judge Ellis's
I remember
courtroom.
that one. I was involved in that campaign with you.
And in Judge Ellis's courtroom, when I tried to cross-examine the witnesses, Lee Johnson and Norman Lindstedt, the crooked attorney, I was threatened with the contempt by Judge Ellis. And I brought in 10 all these retired people, retired fire chiefs, said my conduct was appropriate. And the bar called as witnesses against me Norman Lindstedt and Lee Johnson. And they got on the stand and I tried to cross-examine them. And the judge blocked me from cross-examining them. I said, well, I have a right to cross-examine. He said, you're going to have the same trouble with me, Widener, that you had with. So this was threatening.
And this was Judge Johnson?
No, this was Judge Ellis, who
Judge
found me
Ellis.
guilty and sent me to 6 months in jail.
Oh, yes.
So when I was out and I was there, he held me 30 days because there was heat. So when I got out, I started going around the city, passing out handbills about what was going on, and I met these pastors, Helen and Chet Jones, who were having their property taken out in Clackamas County. Same thing, crooked attorneys stealing their property.
Yeah.
And so they had me put on the property, and I was on the property, and the sheriff came out, and he arrested me, pulled the gun when he came on. And they tried me and convicted me in Judge Maurer's court. My mother and father and neighbors came in, and when I started to speak, he said, I'll clear this courtroom, and he was threatening and intimidating. And so he told the jury it made no difference if Mr. Widener owned the property. The only question was he on it? And so they found me guilty and sent me 10 days in jail. And they walked me right out of the courtroom.
That's called in limine. You see, they didn't let...
That's not
yeah.
no. A motion in limine is a preliminary motion. But they walked me right into the jail, and while I was in jail, I was subpoenaed, by Milton Brown into Multnomah County, where I'd been ordered to stay out of the court by Judge Ellis. So I was subject to being arrested if I came in or if I did not come in. And so I got a crowd of people, went down to the courthouse, and when I went to the court, to presiding court, to make a record that I was being subpoenaed into a court that I'd been ordered to stay out of. And when I went to the room where I had been subpoenaed, there were guards all over. And as I was walking down the hall, I saw Judge Keyes coming out of his chambers. And I had been in the DA's office with him and knew him, and he'd been telling everyone in the courthouse knows that Widener's nuts.
Wow.
And so I said, Keyes, come here. And he ran onto the elevator. And I went up and I held the doors open. I said, Keyes, come here. And he's turning his head in the back of the elevator. We went into the courtroom. The judge wouldn't come out. I said, I've been subpoenaed into this courthouse, been ordered to stay out of it. And the guard said, come on, Roger, let's go down to the other courtroom. So when we went down there, when we walked in, I walked up to the door, and there's this herring who had arrested me previously. And Mother came to me. She says, it's over. And I stepped forward. I said, it's over. And like this, he says, you've assaulted me. You're under arrest. I thought, my God, they are going to do me, and do not let them arrest me. And they jumped on me and were choking me down. And as I turned around, everyone else's eyes were big and round like this, except my mother. And my mother, she was standing there. They had her arms pulled back.
This was Peterson now.
No, this was in Abraham's courtroom. But they were violently, but she was getting over in one foot to kick him.
Oh, yeah. She did kick Peterson.
Yeah, well.
Going down the hall.
And then the next event, shortly after that, we were out in Clackamas County. And they had ordered my psychiatric evaluation. They had done that early on. And then they ordered another one. And when I went to the psychiatrist, I took a group with me. I said, you can ask me anything that you want, except I'm going to have people witness it, so they wouldn't do it.
Yeah.
Well, then when I went into court with a group out there, had another crowd, and in they came, and they locked the doors, shuttered the windows. I thought, they're going to do it. They're going to do me in. And I looked around, and everyone's eyes were like this again, and like a child, I was 60 years old, and I called out, Mother! And Mother, who was sitting in the jury box, I thought she was going to do a one-handed Gilda-spring over that railing. Up she went, up to that judge, and Gregory Milne, she says, what's the meaning of this? What's the meaning of this? And he was backing away from her, like she was a poisonous snake. And they came, so.
Judges treat truth that way, don't they?
Yes. So that's for my mother. I said, since we were one of 4 boys, I said, and the idea that if someone took on one of her kids, they took on my mother. I said, my mother was a lioness. She did not just go out and
She
yip.
certainly was. She's a great warrior.
She didn't just yip and yap a little bit, Will. She would draw blood. She would nail them in a minute if they're messing with us. And it's that, Will. I said, and I want to publicly acknowledge my mother for the absolute support. Absolute support.
A Voice for Children wants to recognize her too. This is a great warrior. I don't know how many demonstrations I've been on with Frances Widener and many others too at the same time, but Frances was always there. She was.
Well, I thought that was interesting, really interesting. Prosecutor turned anti-corrupt court regulator, Roger Wagener, and it's only his mother comes to his rescue. Wow. And all these big, tough patriot guys, and they got their gun collection. Who comes to his rescue against the abusive bailiffs and the abusive court? His mother. His 80, almost 90-year-old mother comes to his rescue. I mentioned we had trouble with the Sergeant Yeke's mother's interview. She's still seeking justice, and she hasn't got it yet. It appears the police department of Oklahoma City do not want to give Sergeant Yeke's mother justice and admit the truth. Even another police officer from Tulsa has written letters and stated, for the record, there is no way Sergeant Yeke could have committed suicide in the fashion that they claim he did. This is part of the cover-up to hide the fact Sergeant Yeke had a tape and he wouldn't tell how many copies and who he gave them to. Heads will yet roll. So, with that, I promised you the Federalist Papers, a modern English edition, 2, by Mary E. Webster, translator, editor, contains the United States Constitution and 85 Federalist Papers, the expanded Universal Federalist Papers Index. I wanted to read to you something the Founding Fathers seriously debated. It's on page 99, paragraph 11, titled Subvert Liberty, the Executive and Legislative Collusion. Now remember, this was written before 1801. Schemes to subvert liberty require time to develop before taking action. A large army would be needed to threaten our liberties. The legislature, the executive, would have to conspire for a long time. Would this happen? Would every man elected to the National Senate or House of Representatives instantly become a traitor to his constituents and his country? Would not one man be able to see the atrocious conspiracy, or bold or honest enough to tell his constituents of their danger? If we assume that this could happen, there should be no more delegated authority. The people should take back the powers already given the government and divide themselves into as many states as there are counties so they can manage their government in person. I didn't write that, but I wish I had. It's exactly what I've been thinking. Our government is really organized on a county level, where the highest law enforcement officer is the elected sheriff. And the reason he's the highest elected officer, he outranks the president, He outranks a U.S. Attorney General in his county because he's elected directly by you and me, we the people. And in some states like Texas, you don't even have to be a certified police officer, and you can be elected sheriff. And then you've got up to 2 years to get your certification. So you could have an uncertified police officer as sheriff. I think Texas is smart. They wrote it that way into their Texas Constitution. So in case your peace officers that are certified become corrupt drug dealers or in some other way corrupt, helping the IRS steal your homes, helping crooked judges and crooked, are there any other kind, attorneys, steal people's property like they're doing up in Pacific County, Washington. Oh, I can't mention that because I haven't brought you that show yet. Or like they did up in Maine, and I did bring you that show, that reporter who's dead now and got shot at for exposing the attorney and judge's corruption in the state of Maine. You remember the state of Maine. That's the one way, way north of Massachusetts or Taxachusetts. State of Maine, you don't remember that one. That's the state where that lesbian Sally Schofield murdered the 5-year-old girl because they didn't trust the mother and father to take good care of little Logan Marr. So Sally Schofield, an ex-CPS worker, Child Protective Service worker, social worker, took her home and duct taped her to death. That's the state of Maine I'm talking about. All over this country, they're stealing property. But look, the Founding Fathers, more than 225 years ago, figured out how they would corrupt us. Paragraph 12, military expansion in peace. Concealing such a conspiracy for long would be impractical. People would see a fast-growing army during peacetime. Following the discovery, the people would quickly destroy the project and its sponsors. Hello, what do we have going on today? We had a peacetime army, and Bush couldn't wait to use it and destroy our civil liberties with the Patriot Act, the most unpatriotic legislation ever passed until this week's boondoggle, this financial ripoff. I want to say this. Please listen to me. Please come in here. Listen to me. If they can bail out these filthy rich gangsters, I call them bank gangsters, the members of the Federal Reserve, and all these financial institutions that made risky loans to make the lucrative fees, knowing, 2% of Americans that get loans would take these come-ons, these discounted low interest rates, and lose their home, lose everything they put into it. They knew that. And the government is willing to bail them out. That makes your Congress a crook. All of them, except Ron Paul, Cindy McKenna, a Democrat from Atlanta, Georgia. A few of them are not crooks. There were some Democrats and there were some Republicans who refused to vote for this bailout. But if they're going to do that, which they have now done, and they're sending it to Bush to sign, then you should vote all incumbents out, in this state of California anyway, and why not force them to pay off your mortgage? Think about that. If they can bail out these billionaires and their board of directors and their CEOs with their golden parachutes, why not bail you and me out? Why not pay off our mortgage for us? Why not return all the foreclosed homes that haven't been resold to the people who had those homes and put them back in there and give them a 1% interest loan? Fixed for 30, due in 30. I used to be in the real estate business. I'd have loved to get a 30-year fixed loan with 1% interest rate. Problem is they've created money out of thin air. We got to get back to gold and silver. But we aren't there yet. The economy hasn't collapsed sufficiently. But I guarantee you, this bailout will not save the country because there's nothing in it. And if you read it, and I started reading it today, didn't have time to finish it all. I started reading it. They're going to start implementing the bailout before they even have the regulatory people appointed to make sure things are done honestly and squarely. So after they've made special deals, this is what's going to happen. They're going to buy up the bad loans. They're going to discount them severely, like 50%, 40%, and then they're going to sell them back to the same crooks who started the mess in the first place at a discount and let them continue to service a loan at some other renegotiated rate. Or they're going to sell off the house at a lower price. This is rewarding the crooks. This is like inviting the wolf into the hen house and then saying, okay, wolf, come on into the hen house, eat some more eggs, eat some more chickens, and then rewarding him with more chickens to eat. This is insanity. But if they're going to do that, why not pay off your credit card for you? Why not pay off your mortgage for you? Why not pay you renters, all these people that don't have mortgages, pay off all your credit cards for you? Why should only the filthy rich bankers who created this crisis get rewarded? And Lois Capps helped them. So did Elton Galigli. Over years of deficit spending on a war we don't need. Well, we're down to 5 minutes, and I've enjoyed my monologue tonight. I hope you got a kick out of Wilbur Gascon, that white-haired guy with a big pot belly, looks like Santa Claus out of uniform. He had his little girl stolen by the state of Oregon. And Widener, Roger Widener, the other guy who used to be a prosecutor, he spent over 300 days in jail since he stopped being a prosecutor and started fighting the corrupt courts. Do we have an honest DA running for judge or not? Is John McKinnon really honest? Do you trust a senior district attorney in Santa Barbara County who won't return my call and even say yes or no, I'll come on your show and face some tough questions, or I won't? The guy's gutless. Even that guy Beebe came on the show and we threw him some hardball questions, but he stood up. Now, I mean, the election's probably already rigged, and they've probably already rigged the die-bolt voting machines to make sure, McKinnon wins. We need to get honest elections. We have no accountability in the system. First, we have to get back the paper ballots. Have a little bit of a tape for you to watch, and I'll be back to say goodbye. Thanks for listening. Next week, you will find this a very interesting show, because this won't repeat but twice. Take care. Watch this.
Under oath in the court of Earth's Guard, in front of a jury. You don't see
Pat,
the
why don't
jury.
are you going to roll the tape?
Okay, are we ready? Okay.
Well, I was just going to have Pamela Gaston kind of set the stage.
I could preface it just a little bit. What it is that she'd made this video. It is pornography. Will has seen the video. It's been called exculpatory by 3 judges. There's no doubt about any of this, except that Hazel Speece is being protected by all of these other individuals and has been. She made this video. She was told to by Larry Lawson. When she made it and tried to give it to him, he wouldn't write her a cover letter to protect her. So she wrote these notes, sort of like, I'm going to tell on you, and sent them up to Susan Cernick, Dan Herman, supervisors at SCF, Diane Rainey, caseworker at SCF, and they sealed the tape in Judge Ochoa's court on October 31st. And so and we didn't know about it for another year. And so when we found out about it, we printed her confession in the newspaper. They came after us with stalking and defamation, all these criminal charges. It just turned into a circus. So we ended up in Earth's Guard's court in front of a jury, and this is the testimony. She gave her own testimony, read her own confession under oath.
And what you have to understand is how extraordinary this situation was. They were prosecuting Pamela and Will Gaston for contempt of court. And what Pamela and Will Gaston had done is assert as an affirmative defense that there was this ongoing conspiracy involving attorneys, judges, these caseworkers, foster mothers.
The whole, yes.
And for 5 days, Pamela Gaston was ripping apart the Robertson, the police officer, and everyone. They looked like they were shot on the stand. They were just sitting there, being charged and not denying it. Obviously guilty. Hazel
Admitting
Speece,
and confessing.
Hazel Speece, the same way, doing that. At the conclusion of that trial, the judge said you must find them guilty because they've admitted violating the stalking order or this...
By writing a newspaper,
right,
they were trying to use...
By writing
yeah.
this... Unless you find, by a preponderance of the evidence, that there was this conspiracy involving the judges, and then, in that case only, you can find them not guilty. Well, out went the jury, and back they came, and 5 not guilty, not guilty, not guilty. So the jury in Marion County found that the judges there, including Ochoa with Paul Lipscomb.
Absolutely. They looked at the orders. They saw how fraud. They said it's fraud. They could see it.
Now, Judge Dickey, I think,
Dickey,
was in on that.
Haas, Abernathy, Lipscomb, Ochoa. Let's see who else. West has been in on this. Terry Leggett has been in on this.
Now, they came to me some 3 years ago, totally distraught over, and you know what I've been through, former prosecutor. They were arresting and jailing me, put me in the insane asylum because they said I had a persecutorial delusion because I was saying these judges were corrupt.
Yeah.
And so they came to me, and I said, you have to go on the offensive against them. And they've done that, and they've turned that whole system around.
Okay, wait a second. Are you running the tape now?
Okay. Go ahead.
Yes.
I don't have a September 30th here.
Right at the second paragraph on the left side at the top, it says September 30th.
Mine says September 15th.
No, it's the next paragraph down. Start where it says September 30th, okay? Not loud, please, for the record.
September 30th, Larry Lawson called and said, well, you know, tomorrow is the big day. I said that I knew it was really getting, it's very concerning. I said that I knew it and was really getting concerned because hadn't heard from him. He said that he would pick up Melissa tomorrow, October 1st, and he and the big boy cop would take her back to Woodburn and see if she could tell them anything about her daddy. I told him that she would probably not say anything because she has only said it to me once, and shortly, a few days later, had taken it back and said that it was a lie and that her daddy only took good care of her and he never touched her private. She said if she says that he would go to prison and get dead. She loves her dad, and even though she knows much more than she tells, she wants to protect him. Larry said he would get back to me about the time that he would pick her up. Can I have some water, please? Sure. You want me to continue?
The whole thing. Yeah.
October 1st. My panties are in a wad. Larry did not come from Melissa, and he hasn't called. I have several calls into him and have not heard from him. October 2nd, Larry and I finally connected, and he told me that the court session was postponed until October.
We're back again. I hope you found that. That was a court scene, and the reason the audio was so bad is because the Oregon courts, like the Utah courts that provide DVDs of the court proceedings, don't want you to watch. They don't want you to have good audio and good video. But what you were watching was part of a trial, of a long, dragged-out process where Pamela and Wilbur Gascon fought to get back a little girl stolen by the state authorities. Yes, stolen by Child Protective Services. And that child has been greatly injured. That little girl has been greatly injured by the state of Oregon. And there you saw the father in court fighting to get it back, to get that little girl back. And the state would not give it back. Child Protective Services is, in effect, the government's organized kidnapping ring. And we're going to take you in a few weeks down to Caldwell County, Texas, where we interviewed the Rodriguez family, where a noisy, problematic, nosy neighbor gave one of their daughters a book about family abuse when there was none. And now when I want to interview that family, in particular the woman, Carol, who gave that book, she doesn't want to talk because all the charges that were originally got Mr. Rodriguez arrested have been dropped. As soon as they got the daughters, even the teenage daughters, stolen from the family. And it has so traumatized that family that one daughter, when she turned 18, her attorney had to carry her back at midnight and give it back to the family. The same girl they were trying to protect so much under the age 18 was worth no ka-ching, ka-ching, ka-ching money for the divorce, the CPS racket, the kidnappers we call Child Protective Services. As soon as they could get no federal funding for her because she's over 18, they threw her back to the same parents they had said earlier were a threat and a danger. That girl was afraid to even come out and be interviewed. But I did talk to her brother, her sister, and her parents. Interesting. I hope you will seek out this book, The Federalist Papers. It's never taught in public schools anymore because then our children would know how to defend their liberties. The Federalist Papers, the best modern vernacular written by Mary E. Webster. I hope you get a copy from Mary E. Webster. I got 3 copies. She's in South Beach, Oregon. Her website is mary.webster.org. With that, we come to the end of our show. I hope, if nothing else, you vote against all incumbents, even the incumbents I like. Because we need to send a message to Congress, who you cannot touch. They are untouchable. I guarantee you, in spite of the anger in this country, less than 10% of the 435 Congress critters will be voted out of office, when they all should be voted out, with the exception of maybe 100 Republicans and 70 or 80 Democrats. They all should be voted out. Do you think you're going to see 300 voted out? Not going to happen.